I was just like trying to seek comfort or healing in popularity or in guys liking me. Yeah, kind of trying to like work out my feelings anywhere else but going to God.
The heart is deep. You're so unique.
You got to find the truth underneath, so let's... Awesome. Well, for those of us joining us, we're exploring this topic of my father's love. We're exploring, man, how influential a father is to their child. And we've explored different types of relationship. And this one is a very special one to Erica and myself and so many others. You know, Alex Rice Campaldini, she and her family unfortunately lost her father when she was 16 years old. A little bit about Dan Rice. He, no exaggeration, truly a legendary guy, extremely influential nationwide. He was a minister for a number of years. He led youth and family for a long time. That's where his passion was. So a lot of the youth camps that was done in our Heartland region, which covered multiple states, he was responsible for teenagers, but also for young kids. But he loved it. Many people loved him dearly. And so when he tragically passed, it really affected so many people, but more so the people that grew up with him. And so Alex is going to share a story and that dynamic with us. And we're so grateful to have you.
It's so wonderful and humbling to get to share my story. I love getting to talk about my papa.
Yes,
Awesome.
yes. And so a little about Alex, excuse me. She's got a master's degrees in learning development, family sciences. If I'm not mistaken, I saw on Facebook, you got 100%. Is that like even possible? Like, is that true?
I don't know how that happened. I worked through it really slowly, but yeah, I'm like classic teacher. I'm like definitely a teacher's pet.
That's incredible. So you got 100. I was like, I didn't know if her husband was joking, but it is true. Okay. So Alex has a 10-month-old baby, and so she's a new mom as well. And she's a kindergarten teacher at a Title I school. From what you explained, that's for underdeveloped areas. So I'm sure that was an intentional and that was a plan of yours, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's where my heart has always lied.
So that speaks volume of who you are. So,
wow.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, let's jump into this dynamic. So can you tell us, man, what was it like being Dan's daughter? What was it like being his daughter?
It was epic. I mean, so the joke was that everyone thought that they were his best friend. Like everyone, if they were talking about my dad, would say, well, yeah, I'm his best friend, or that, we were best friends. But how much more so did he make his family members feel that way? And growing up with my dad, I felt so loved. He would just lavish me with words of affirmation. And I think like my favorite thing is that I know that he would also speak that way of me when I was out of the room. I'd had so many of his friends come and tell me, your dad talks about how much he loves you all the time, like kind of embarrassingly so. But he was like a little kid at heart. He made everything, even like the most mundane. We're going to the grocery store. It was like a fun adventure. It was the best.
I heard you even had a little language that you said together.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yeah. We would write little notes to each other in this like secret language that we had come up with together. Nobody else knows the secret language.
Really? Knows?
No one, not even my husband, not my mama. Nobody knows it. Yeah. So that's when, after he passed, I got one of the sentences tattooed on me, just in memory of him. But to this day, nobody knows what it means.
Yeah, that's
so
awesome.
That's so beautiful.
Cool. That speaks volumes of your relationship with him. Yeah, even like the few interactions I had with him, like he really, when Eric and I broke up, long story short, he was like, Laurence, you're kind of stupid. Like, you want to marry her? But he said it in such a loving and endearing way. It was like, yeah, you're right, Dad. But I had so many good interactions with him. So when he passed, that dear friend, this special bond, this super close relationship that you had, I'm sure he was a hero in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
So when he passed tragically, like, can you talk us through what was that like? How did that feel?
Yeah, I mean, the words that I have used whenever I've talked about this don't seem quite enough, but it was devastating. I think for me, it was the first time in my life that like my safe bubble had burst. And so that was very hard. I mean, my world felt turned upside down, and I was heartbroken. I was angry and confused. And yeah, I mean, at the time I had become a Christian 2 years prior to when it had happened. I was 16 when he passed. And so I had been a Christian for a couple of years at that point. And to be honest, high school is hard to be a Christian in high school. And so I was definitely like in this weird lukewarm spot. And so it all kind of like that event happening while I was kind of in this like weird lukewarm space in my faith, it just all collided, and it was a mess for a while. But yeah, it opened my eyes to like how fragile life is, and really gave like a tangible meaning to the idea that our days are numbered.
What void were you trying to fill when he left, you know?
Yeah, I mean, he was my best friend and the rock of our family, and also he had so many other roles in my life. Like he was my team leader and my minister, as well as being my dad and my best friend. And so when he left, and I think I just sought out other humans to fill that void. I've always been naturally a people pleaser. I've always wanted that kind of affirmation from others, but it was like tenfold after he passed. And I chased after boys and relationships, and just like threw myself into friendships. And that's not necessarily like, it's not bad in of itself, but what I was doing with that, rather than like bringing my hurt and brokenheartedness to God, I was just like trying to seek comfort or healing in popularity or in guys liking me. Kind of trying to like work out my feelings anywhere else but going to God, because I didn't really want to talk to God about how I was feeling.
Totally. Like, how long do you think that lasted? Like, when did you start coming to the other side of that?
It kind of went in phases. I'd say about 6 months after, I had just been such a knucklehead, and I was dating these guys that were like not right for me, in these guys that were not trying to follow Jesus, not trying to live by the word. And Crystal Schmidt was just a big sister in my life at that time. And so she had some like, you're being a knucklehead conversations with me, which I'm so grateful for.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like the start of it. And actually my little brother had a lot of those conversations with me as well.
Little bro?
I know. And you know, it's amazing because he was like, hey, he's like, I am not trying to live the life of a disciple, but I know that you are, and you're not doing it. And like, to hear those words from your little brother, they can sting. But that kind of started me on this journey towards getting my act together. And, I started going to therapy, and that was huge. And then I'd say by a year later, kind of in that, like the 6 to 12 months after, I had gotten someone to really listen to me professionally, in my therapist, but then also I had been able to just let my guard down and really walk with God in my pain. And that, of course, made all the difference. And then I would say with grief, it doesn't end ever. No. You're always missing that person. And so, like year after year, things will come up kind of like a wave of emotion or grief will hit. And so we still have to work through it. Yeah. So yeah.
No, I can relate. I lost my mom like a month after Dan. And I just there's just things you remember, and that just kind of comes up. And sometimes I have a good cry or a good prayer time or just a good like writing things down and I'm able to still move forward, but I need to just like embrace those moments and say, all right, this I'm feeling and it hurts. And then I can just, still go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
I talked to a good friend, Kyle Spears. He described, just not having a dad or losing a dad as a traumatic experience. And I think that's so true. There's this hole, there's this void in us, especially when you're young, you're a teenager, hey, I feel something. I may not know exactly what it is, but I want to feel that. And things don't make sense. And it's hard to understand. So, absolutely. It's very intense. And I appreciate you sharing about, again, therapy.
And so vulnerably.
Yeah.
I did too. I needed it.
Yeah. So, it's such a good thing. It's such a good thing. So, I guess I'm just curious. I want to just explore this dynamic. We're going off the plan here a little bit.
Love it.
So these other relationships you were seeking, I really appreciate you sharing that. Were you at that age, were you consciously knowing, hey, I'm trying to feel what my dad gave me? Or was it just like, hey, I'm lonely, I want to feel that?
Yeah, it was totally the second one. My prefrontal cortex was not fully developed yet. So I probably would have been getting into some of that trouble with him there, but I think that I didn't know it at the time. That absolutely was what was driving my need for everyone to like me, my need for attention and affection, from friends and from boyfriends alike. So yeah, I don't think it was a conscious thing, but I did know what I was doing was not the way to go, but the impulse was absolutely
so strong.
Being a 16-year-old.
13. Oh
yeah.
So it is, hey, give grace to teenagers. Kids, if your teenagers are acting up out there, hey, give us some grace, give us some space. They may not know exactly why. It's crazy because when I reflect back on my childhood, I love my dad, but there were some things he didn't provide. And looking back, knowing I know now, it's I just wanted affirmation. My dad wasn't the very loving, very I'll give you a hug, tell you I love you. So that's what I was seeking through my friends. And I know I shouldn't be partying or ditching school, but I wanted to please this group, love me and accept me. So I was going to do whatever they wanted me to do.
Totally.
So that desire drives so much of our decisions. So, and then at what point did you, obviously you had a talk with Crystal, but when did you personally realize these relationships, these things I'm doing, it's not filling the hole. That hole is still there.
I think you're asking just one aha moment.
Or was there an aha moment?
Or
yeah. I mean, so a year after, so I had changed behavior as far as stopped dating the guy, but I would say a year later, I went to do a Hope Youth Corps in Pennsylvania. And while I was there for 8 weeks, it's the longest I've been away from home. And I think getting out, even getting away from being Dan Rice's daughter, because, people didn't really know me on the East Coast. And it gave me space to work things out, because a part of my grief that was challenging was that so many other people were having shared grief about my dad. So many of my friends, he was like a father figure to them or an uncle to them. And in so many of my mentors, he was a good friend. So that was helpful for me because I got to really gain some clarity and have some space to grieve and feel and reflect. And it was just me and God. And there were some really fundamental people there that loved me and walked with me in that space. But it was, I felt like I was on my own in this strange new land, and God met me there. But so that was a year later. It was the next summer.
For those young teenagers or whoever else have lost their parent at a young age, I'm sure there's when you got married, had your kid, what are some other moments that was very difficult to deal with, that was difficult for you, that you can maybe help others to be aware of it as well?
Yeah. So I moved to, my dad passed away at 16. I went to college at 18, and I had dreams of going to different schools around the country. I ended up going to a school in Kansas City, which I loved, but to be honest, it's because I had this like fear of completely leaving home, and leaving my mom. And so I was in Kansas City for a couple of years, but then I transferred out here to Colorado, which is where I'm living now. And that transition was huge. And that had moments of major grief for me because I didn't have my dad to walk me through that huge life transition. So I think any significant change, so for me it was moving to Colorado and then graduating from college with my undergraduate. I did that the same year I got married, and that year I went back to therapy because I just realized it had been years and years and years since my dad had passed, but my grief came up in this brand new way. And my trauma from losing my dad looked a lot more, it presented itself more like anxiety, but really it was just, I had all this grief of him not being there to watch me graduate, or not being there to walk me down the aisle or have the father-daughter dance, the grief of him just not knowing my husband, like they never got to meet. Yeah. And that probably, with now him also not knowing my daughter, those are like, that's a major grief for me. Because these are the two people that I love the most in my life now. And for him to not know them, that's so odd to me. Yeah. So, I have just realized that as life goes on, because, again, with me graduating with my master's this past year, just these moments where he would have been there and he would have been so proud or been my rock or been a guiding light. I mean, honestly, there's sometimes just grief that comes up when I'm just going through a hard time, or, our church is going through turbulence or whatever. I'm having conflict with someone and I just want to call him because I know he'd have the right thing to say, or, that he would love to be watching the playoffs with my husband, or, whatever. I'd be so fascinated to know what he thinks of everything that's happening with politics right now. It's just, you just miss the like intricacies of him being there for those big moments, but also the like little times too, where I would have just leaned on him and I realized I can't. Yeah. So, yeah.
That's tough. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So now as a Christian and you sought help and you have tools on how to cope. And so how do you feel the hole now? Like there is that hole that's always there. So how do you feel that?
I think that God has taught me so much about how he can fill in, how he is the perfect father. I think it can be really easy to look back on people that we've lost with a lot of like rose-colored glasses. And my dad was so wonderful. So like a lot of the like rose-colored glasses things were actually true and legit. But like, I know that there were ways he was not the perfect father as well, but God is. And so I think that has been so cool. In my many times of missing having an earthly dad, I have seen God show up time and time again, and in ways that I couldn't have even expected before it happened. And so I would say that hole has been filled tenfold for me. And because God allowed me to have such an awesome earthly relationship with a father, it's taught me so much about God's love for me. And it's made me really like grateful that I can connect to that part of who God is pretty easily.
Wow.
Can you give us an example of one time where you feel like it was tenfold?
Yeah. I mean, there are so many to think of. I feel like this is going to be so silly and trivial, but at the time it felt like such a big deal. So in my senior year of high school, I had just gone through, because my dad passed away right before I went into my junior year. So my junior year was just like a hot mess. I would not go back to that year again. But my senior year, things got turned around. And that year, there were still some hard things that happened, but I will never forget that I won like homecoming court or something. And I remember feeling so like it was so God. It was not expected. It was like this kind of out of the blue thing, but I just felt like I'm a princess, like I'm God's princess. And here he is making me feel special and loved. And it wasn't about people, which is kind of funny because, you know, you're like voted in for that. But I just remember feeling like, wow, God loves me. And it's such like a silly thing, like so not important for the rest of your life.
That's amazing.
But I felt so loved by God. And then also, so my thing with God has always been white butterflies. And this has been recurrent for, I mean, now like a decade and a half or something. But whenever I'm having a hard day or a really amazing day or anything in between, and I'm praying or I'm walking or I'm feeling lost or I'm feeling on the mountaintop, white butterflies will just kind of come out of nowhere. And it has happened, I cannot even tell you how many times.
Cool.
So that's my special God thing. And I just feel like that's God's way of being like, hey, I'm here. I gotcha. I'm your daddy.
That's so cool.
Wow.
That's awesome. I love that because one of my favorite questions to ask people is like, hey, how do you connect with God when you can't see or hear him? So it's cool to hear. Yeah, exactly. There's like this cool, unique way where in the depth of your heart and the depth of your soul, you know, this is from God. And that makes that relationship so unique and special, you know, and I love that because it's more than just rules and the Bible and go to church. Yeah. There's a whole nother level and depth that you can have with a relationship with God.
Totally.
Yeah. So like, do you think you could have made it this far without God? Do you think, hey, you know, I could have just, you know,
hung in there,
worked harder, you know, just put my nose to whatever that saying is. But like,
oh my gosh, no way. I would be so lonely and so isolated. I don't think I said this, but that year of chasing after love and security and affirmation from people, I felt so alone, so isolated. And, you know, I had like really wonderful friends that were there for me, that walked me through that time, but still, you know, I just, like was working so hard for approval. And so, without God healing me and loving me and sticking by me, I think that right now I would just be such an insecure, lonely woman. And I would be always just working to earn a sense of security and a sense of like worthiness. And that's a really sad place to be. So I'm grateful that he saved me from that. And I mean, he honestly continues to save me from that because that's totally my nature to like try to earn affection.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Appreciate sharing. What advice do you have for especially young teenagers if they've tragically lost a parent or a hero of theirs?
Or a mentor.
Yeah, someone they really admired and had this deep relationship with. What advice can you pass on to them?
I would say, well, one of the best things that was ever told to me was that there's no right way to grieve. That for so many people, it just looks really different, and then that's okay. But to be honest and vulnerable with the people around you, but then again, especially with God, and he can handle all your crazy feelings. And that was revolutionary to me. That's actually one of the things that Crystal shared, that like God can handle me being mad at him. Like that's okay. And you don't want to stay there, but like you can't move past it if you're not going to own up to it and be vulnerable about it. And so I would say, just share and don't stuff it all in or feel like you can just, I don't know, get by with filling that hole, with purchases or throwing yourself into a hobby or throwing yourself into relationships or whatever it might be. But it's going to be messy. And also I would say that with grief, that it never goes away, but it does dull. The pain dulls. It's always present, but it won't feel like it does right now, right after you have the loss. It won't feel like that forever. Yeah. So that's been a relief for me as well.
That's awesome. What about to fathers? This goes specifically with dads that may have a hard time wanting to connect with their kids or see the importance that they have in their kids' lives. What advice or what insight can you share with those dads about how important they are to their children?
So the first thing I would say is tell them you love them often. Tell them what you love about them, why you love them. Not just that you love them, but the specifics will really stay in their heart. And then I would say be so curious about them. My dad always pursued me. That's how I felt. I felt like he wanted to know me. He wanted to know what I was interested in. He would take me and my girlfriends to Starbucks, and we'd be giggling in the back seat, and he would so want to be a part of it. So much so that I'm like, Dad, stop. But I felt like he wanted to know me and my friends and made such an effort. He took me on a date regularly. I don't know. It was at least once a month, if not every week. I don't remember, but he was so intentional, and just have fun and laugh a lot with your kids.
No, I love everything you shared.
Yeah.
And really what's sticking with me is how you said you feel like God has filled that void 10 times. And I really want to just meditate on that. I think losing my own mom, thinking about, I can apply that to my own loss in that way. So I just really appreciate your insight, your depth, and your vulnerability to share with us. It's amazing. It's so beautiful and godly.
Yeah, and I think it's heartwarming because, like I said earlier, I think so many people miss out on what it means to have a relationship with God. Giving your advice to teenagers, once again, God's not like, oh, get your attitude right. You better not be mad. You better be happy all the time. Like, no, that's far from God. That's far from what a dad is like. That God is available and He wants to connect in the high times.
Be real,
in the low times,
like you said,
and God wants to connect, and so.
Yeah, absolutely.
How He wants to work with you.
It makes me think of, so one of my favorite scriptures is Isaiah 41:10, but it makes me think of what you're saying, where it says, do not fear, for I am with you. And that verse ends with it saying, I will hold you by your right hand. And I love that, because it's like, God does not care what kind of mess you are that day. He wants to be there and hold your hand.
Yeah.
Just like any good dad would want that.
Totally. Absolutely. That's awesome. Alex, thanks for sharing your story. Thanks for sharing your thoughts, your advice, and being so very real about your experience and how you've healed. And shout out to Crystal Schmidt and everyone else out there,
and little bro.
Yeah.
So we need people to help us, so I love that you're doing that. So thanks for being a great example in your life right now. And I'm sure your father is incredibly proud of you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing your stories as well. And it was humbling and a chance to talk with you guys.
No, absolutely. So I want people to follow you. So I'm going to put your Instagram at the bottom. I don't know if you have Twitter or not, but I want people to follow you, watch your life, and be inspired. So.
Oh, thanks. Love you guys.
Love you too, Alex.
Thank you.
The heart is deep. You're so unique.
You got to find the truth underneath. So let's